Good morning. Welcome to NewsWire here on SportsGrid on this Friday as we get you ready for the Final Four. On the men's side and the women's side as well, we got previews of all the games coming up. We'll dive into the latest in the National Football League. Guest contributors, as always, from Legal Sports Report. We got Coach Young coming up later in the show also to talk a little college hoops as well. So stick with us here on the grid, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern every day. That is NewsWire here on SportsGrid exclusively with me. We begin tonight with the Final Four in college basketball, arguably the best game, maybe the most popular game, and no doubt the most intriguing game on the slate. I'll get to it. First, let's start off with the first of two games in women's college basketball in the Final Four. We've got NC State taking on South Carolina. It is the biggest spread of all of the games going on this weekend on the men's or women's side in the Final Four. South Carolina, 11.5-point favorites, and the total is 139.5. That game is tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Now, of course, the game that everybody will be focused on, and arguably the most watched game of the entire year, it already has been previously, it is this drama matchup between UConn and Iowa, and Caitlin Clark on display. The Huskies are underdogs in this game, plus 2.5 points. The well-seasoned Huskies winning championship after championship in women's college basketball. They haven't played a player like Caitlin Clark like this. And tonight, that game is 9:30 p.m. Eastern. We got this one covered for you over on In-Game Live. And make sure you catch us here on SportsGrid with analysis constantly during those games. Of course, the two games tomorrow that we'll preview in the Final Four. We'll do that a little bit later in the show. Okay, a quick update. Stefon Diggs. Now this makes a little bit more sense from the Buffalo Bills side with them trading Stefon Diggs, because the Houston Texans, with this trade that they made with Diggs, essentially have wiped out the rest of his contract. We found this out yesterday. So the Texans took $3.5 million guaranteed to Diggs next season and moved it to this season. So now he's making a total of $22.5 million in 2024, but also puts Diggs in a position where if he likes, he can become a free agent after this year. There's also reports saying that he's changing his name to, or I'm sorry, his number to the number 1 instead of 14, and paid $100,000 to get that done. So Stefon Diggs, his tenure in Houston begins right now. Now, the future of Rashee Rice, the wide receiver of the Kansas City Chiefs, seems to be somewhat in question, although it seems like his attorneys and he have gotten together to figure out how they're going to handle this issue that happened last weekend. The wide receiver's attorney said on Thursday that it's a good question that's being investigated as far as his car crash. His attorney says that Rice was driving a Lamborghini in the crash. Quote, he's a young man that made a mistake. His heart goes out to the people who were injured in the crash. Now, needless to say, this will be investigated, of course, by legal authorities, and then it'll move over to the National Football League. As far as what happens with Rice this season still remains to be seen. All right, now, in terms of extensions and free agency, we're still in that season in the National Football League. The Philadelphia Eagles, very important piece, blocking Jalen Hurts, is Jordan Mailata. He's agreed to a 3-year, $66 million contract extension, and so he stays blocking for Hurts for the future. Also, the Baltimore Ravens announced a signing. It is Kyle Van Noy. He signs a 2-year deal up to $9 million. The Ravens lost to Jadeveon Clowney. He signed with the Panthers. And Van Noy had a nice season for Baltimore last season. He had 9 sacks in his 10th NFL season. The Ravens led the NFL last year with 60 sacks in the National Football League. Okay, over in hockey, the Phoenix Coyotes, of course, they are looking for a new home. They are in a bid for an arena and some new land on June the 27th. They're playing in a facility that naturally is not up to standards for the National Hockey League, and they're looking to get this done because there is some potential talk about if they don't, again, we see this all the time in professional sports, could they move out of Phoenix? 150,000 square foot practice facility, by the way, included in this new deal. Okay, we've got a game coming up in a couple of hours from now. It's the home opener for the Detroit Tigers. I'll get to their finish yesterday. They played 2 games against the New York Mets, but unfortunately the news just keeps getting worse for the Miami Marlins, off to an 0-8 start this season. Worst in franchise history. They're also losing Yuri Perez, their starting pitcher, for the remainder of the season. He's going to undergo Tommy John surgery on Monday with Dr. Meister in Dallas. Of course, Sandy Alcantara, their Cy Young Award winner from a couple of years ago, had this done last November. It's been a mess for the Marlins, and unfortunately, it only gets worse. Yuri Perez going to be out for the season. Pete Alonso, the hero for the New York Mets. They were looking for any hero they could get yesterday. Finally, he was the one. He tied it in the ninth. The Mets win it in their first win of the season. They walk it off at Citi Field. The Tigers were undefeated up until that point, as I mentioned. Comerica Park will host the first Tigers game this season. Alonso, by the way, his 500th career RBI yesterday. Brett Beatty was the game-winning run on a single by Tyrone Taylor. Now, in Major League Baseball, there was a lot of talk about these new jerseys, these new uniforms, as they say, with the really small names and numbers on the back. All kinds of sweating issues going on as well. In a statement issued to The Athletic on Thursday, Nike, the manufacturer of the jerseys, admitted that they're testing different options to lessen the moisture-related aesthetic color differences. My gosh, what a mess it has been with these new jerseys. A lot of finger-pointing going on here with fanatics in Major League Baseball, but it looks like Nike are the culprits here for at least having this in the early part of the season. Also, as many of you know, on Monday, the eclipse is coming, the solar eclipse. The Yankees and Marlins, instead of playing in the afternoon, they're going to play at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. The first 15,000 guests, by the way, at that game are going to get a Yankees solar eclipse T-shirt presented by HubSpot. So I just gave them a little plug unnecessarily. Okay, NBA, we've got a coaching move to talk about here. The Charlotte Hornets parted ways with their head coach, or they will at the end of the season. They've gotten permission to replace Steve Clifford with 4 different assistants. Denver Nuggets assistant David Adelman, Sacramento Kings Jordi Fernandez, Boston Celtics Charles Lee, and Phoenix Suns Kevin Young. Could be one of those 4. Haley Van Lith from LSU has entered the transfer portal. She averaged 11.6 points and 3-point assists per game this past season. The Tigers just lost recently in the Elite Eight. She was eligible to declare for the WNBA draft, but also has a 5th year of eligibility. So we'll see which one she ends up choosing. USC has a new basketball coach. You may recognize the name. He's been well-traveled in both college and pro. Eric Musselman is the new head coach of Southern California, 59 years old. And in 5 seasons at Arkansas, Musselman was 111-59. And also, in case you missed it last night, not a lot of discussion. Boy, the NIT tournament used to be a big deal. No longer the case, right? Seton Hall beat Indiana State last night, 79-77. Their first NIT championship since 1953. Not something to be super proud of in the end. They want to play in the NCAA tournament. But if you're going to win something, at least win in the NIT. Also, some breaking news here on the show. USC's player, and of course, the name is familiar, Bronny James, son of LeBron James, has declared for the NBA draft. It was just announced yesterday that he was entering the transfer portal at USC. So now a little wrinkle to that. He can either play in the NBA next season, or he can transfer and play somewhere else in college basketball. We'll see what ends up happening. But as LeBron James has stated many times, perhaps the team that ends up with Bronny is the team that ends up with him. So intrigue coming this summer after the NBA season. We'll talk some NFL with Matt Lutovsky from Sporting. After this quick timeout, you're watching NewsWire on SportsGrid. I'm Craig Mish. Happy Friday to all of you. We'll be back after these quick messages. Stay with us on the grid. We'll be right back.
So I'm not sure Alabama is the team to knock them off from this second consecutive national championship chase. But what will be the key for the Crimson Tide if they can even cover a number?
That wing ball screen action, how you defend that is going to be a problem because Donovan Clingan forces you to change so much what you do defensively if he's able to score inside.
Only on SportsGrid.
Talk all you want about how fat he is. No one can guard him. No one can stop him. He's a violent offender. He does whatever he wants in the low block and at the 10. He just does whatever he wants and scores at will, ad nauseum.
They're the Mike Tyson of college basketball. At some point, they're going to throw a haymaker. And when it connects, Pharrell, you're not getting up.
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid, your 24/7 sports wagering network. The early line.
Magical and historic season in Lincoln, Nebraska continues.
He is the best player in the NBA, but also in the biggest moments where the national media is watching.
NewsWire.
Something that we have never seen happen before with one of the iconic coaches in the game.
Pharrell coast to coast.
The team covers. It's automatic. It's every time. Not sometimes. It's every time.
Game time decisions.
Luka is actually far more dangerous from three on the road this year than at home.
This game here tonight, you may want to consider taking as many points as humanly possible.
In-game live. Prime time.
We got not one, but two coaches fired systems in place.
Sports Rage
This
Late
sort of
Night.
has letdown written all over it. It's going to be hard to match the emotion that they played with the other night.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Time to rap a little bit about the National Football League. Not with me like doing hip-hop raps, but maybe Matt Lutovsky could do a little bit. When I mean rap, I mean go back and forth. Me and Matt will share some thoughts on the latest in free agency. Of course, the big trade a couple of days ago as he joins us now courtesy of Sporting News. And you know, Matt, this time of the year, the NFL, takes a little bit of a back seat, I think, to some of the other sports. Of course, we have the Masters coming up. But it sort of feels like the calendar works like this, Matt. You tell me if you agree. Of course, you cover it all. It feels like we've got, college basketball's NCAA tournament. We got opening day in Major League Baseball. Then we got the Final Four. Next week we have the Masters. And then we have the NFL draft. And then that's when the NFL calendar sort of starts heating up again. I think we saw was it Harbaugh that said the other day that our season begins April 1st? I think I saw that.
Yeah, I don't think the NFL is ever out of season. Even when those other sports are getting their time in the sun, the NFL, it's almost because the NFL is letting them. It's just there. It's always ready to go. It's always ready for something to happen. People are always interested. So, yeah, the NFL is it's the behemoth and the gift that keeps on giving for sports media anyway.
Yeah, it is. All right, so let's touch on this trade that sent Stefon Diggs from Buffalo to Houston. Honestly, I think the more intriguing part of this, and I want to get into this with you, it would be the Buffalo Bills status here. Because, look, Houston's doing the right thing, Matt. They got their quarterback. They signed a running back. They've got good receivers. They're going for it right now. So Diggs goes to that team. We found out there was a restructured contract here, which basically makes him a free agent at the end of the season. There's no question, Matt, that Diggs, even if he isn't himself like he was 2-3 years ago, he's still a huge addition to the team. But I'm more curious what you think, Matt, about Buffalo, because as it stands right now, with arguably one of the best, 2, 3, 4 wide quarterbacks in the NFL and Josh Allen, his weapons definitely leave something to be desired. And that's where I think the focus comes in on the draft, because do you see any free agent wide receivers that could replace him?
Yeah, probably not at this point. There's been plenty of talk about a trade. I think Buffalo fans have talked themselves into Justin Jefferson going there, which seems like a little bit of a long shot. But there's always the potential for a trade. It's the NFL. Weird things happen, especially when you start factoring money in the salary cap, and you don't know what teams are going to do. But as it stands right now, like you said, Curtis Samuel's the number one wide receiver, and Dalton Kincaid is probably the number one overall receiver. And that doesn't seem like enough for a team that has legitimate championship aspirations, or at least it did last year, and it has a quarterback who, you would ascribe championship aspirations to. So they're a very strange team in that regard. The one thing I'd say is I think Stefon Diggs, he's on the wrong side of 30. I think he's a tough guy to play with. And they went 5-0 down the stretch last regular season, with Diggs having arguably his worst stretch of his Buffalo career. So I don't know how much he really matters to Buffalo's success. I think you'd rather have him than not have him. But I also think he's tough to play with, like I said. And given his age, given everything else, I don't know how much he's swinging individual lines, how much he's swinging a win total. But the loss of Gabe Davis coupled with that really looks like that wide receiver room is barren. So, yeah, they are a very interesting team. And, of course, maybe even the bigger deal is all the losses they had in the secondary, too, which hurts that defense. Because if they want to be a run-first offense with a tough-nosed defense, they probably need to get a little better on defense first. Josh Allen and James Cook and probably a running back they had in the draft, they're fine. They can handle that. Offensive line is fine. But I still think you need another receiving weapon, and you probably need a little better secondary too.
Yeah, I would agree. Diggs goes to Houston, Gabe Davis to Jacksonville, Poyer to Miami, and Tre'Davious White, the other player that you mentioned, ends up going to the Rams. So as far as their futures are concerned, Matt, I mean, I guess if you were thinking about betting on the Buffalo Bills, now would be the time, right? Because you're at the ultimate buy low.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing we know about the NFL is quarterbacks move the needle more than any other position. And they still have that. And they're coming off a good season where they kind of hurt themselves in terms of their schedule this year by that late season surge. It might have been nicer for them if they were a wild card team instead of winning the division. Aaron Rodgers is going to be back for the Jets, so we don't exactly know how much better that's going to make them if he can stay healthy, but it should make them quite a bit better. They've made some moves too in the offseason. So, the Bills don't exactly look like a team with a Super Bowl outlook. But again, you have that quarterback, and that goes a long way in the NFL. They have coaches who've been there, who have experience. So you're right in the sense that if you really want to bet on their futures, which is kind of just a bet on Josh Allen more than anything, this is the low point. I think as they start potentially making a trade, making another signing, and certainly after the draft, they're only going to look better on paper, which is just gonna alter those numbers a little bit and not give as good a value.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something to watch with Buffalo, especially to me. I know you mentioned trade. If their trade is in the draft, where they're mortgaging some future for a very high pick for a wide receiver this year, boy, that would change the outlook for them completely. So stay tuned. Houston seems pretty much set, on the other hand, with Stroud and Mixon, Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Dalton Schultz. I mean, that's a heck of a lineup, Matt, for Houston. And they should be going for it, and they should certainly be in a position to win the division. It's sort of shocking to me, honestly, that we're not even talking about Jacksonville anymore, because I thought they would be the team that we'd be talking about like this.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a little bit of a mistake to not talk about Jacksonville that way. They're still a very good team. And yeah, Houston won the division last year, so that gives them a leg up, at least in people's minds. You mentioned that offense, and it does look fantastic on paper. Sometimes I worry, though, when you get offenses like that, is it a fantasy football team or is it a real team? I think fans can get focused on offense a little too much. The great thing for Houston is they went out and added to the defense. They added Daniil Hunter. Right. They added Danico Autry. They added Jeff Okudah. They added Azeez Al-Shahir. So they really made improvements, or tried to make improvements everywhere. And C.J. Stroud being on that second year, that rookie deal in his second year, that just gives them the freedom to make these moves. I thought it was a little curious what they did with Diggs and his contract. But that's sort of another topic for another day. But all that matters is who they have this year, who's going to be on the field, and it looks great on paper. But the one thing I'll say about it is you look at their schedule, and by virtue of winning the division, which is great, and they needed to do, and they got in the playoffs, the 3 games they have that are different than the other teams in their division is the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Cowboys. So that's no joke. Those are 3 huge games. And you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they have the Raiders instead of the Chiefs. They have the Browns instead of the Ravens. Browns are still a good team. and they have the Eagles instead of the Cowboys. The Eagles are still a good team. But I think most people would say that Houston's schedule is tougher. And that could really come down to it at the end of the year, where one game separates who wins the division, who gets in the playoffs, etc.
Yeah. All right, Matt, let's end with this. This one of the stories off the field in the NFL going on right now is this story about wide receiver for the Chiefs, Rashee Rice. I don't want to say it's getting worse by the day, but it certainly does appear that there's going to be some culpability with him. He really came on last year, which is a shame for the Kansas City Chiefs. But more importantly, it's a serious issue. People got hurt. There was a crash. And it's sort of strange to be even talking about his future in the NFL when you have, human beings injured and things of that nature. But, hopefully they're okay. As far as Rice is concerned, Matt, I got to say looks a little cloudy for me now.
Yeah, I mean, you got to figure at least a few games. It's always tough to try to guess punishments with the NFL. You never know what you're going to do. No one passed, fortunately. So, like you said, this sounds crass to say, but that helps his cause. And a couple games suspension. And how far it goes from there, I don't know. It's a good thing they signed Hollywood Brown for their sake. I'll say that.
Yeah, I guess so. We'll end there. All right, Matt, thanks again for coming on. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
We'll be back with Jim Gazzale from Legal Sports Report next.
So I'm not sure Alabama is the team to knock them off from this second consecutive national championship chase. But what will be the key for the Crimson Tide if they can even cover a number?
That wing ball screen action, how you defend that is going to be a problem because of Donovan Clingan, it forces you to change so much what you do defensively if he's able to score inside.
Only on SportsGrid.
Talk all you want about how fat he is. No one can guard him. No one can stop him. He's a violent offender. He does whatever he wants in the low block and at the 10. He just does whatever he wants and scores at will, ad nauseum.
They're the Mike Tyson of college basketball. At some point, they're going to throw a haymaker. And when it connects, Pharrell, you're not getting up.
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. Your 24/7 sports wagering network. The early line.
Magical and historic season in Lincoln, Nebraska continues.
He is the best player in the NBA, but also in the biggest moments where the national media is watching.
NewsWire.
Something that we have never seen happen before with one of the iconic coaches in the game.
Pharrell Coast to Coast.
The team covers. It's automatic. It's every time. Not sometimes. It's every time.
Game time decisions.
Luka is actually far more dangerous from three on the road this year than at home.
This game here tonight, you may want to consider taking as many points as humanly possible.
In-game live. Prime time.
We got not one, but two coaches fired systems in place.
Sports Rage
This
Late
sort of
Night.
has letdown written all over it. It's going to be hard to match the emotion that they played with the other night.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire, our daily look around the globe at sports wagering from our guests at Legal Sports Report. You can read them at legalsportsreport.com and follow them on social media as well. Our guest today to talk about the very latest on NASCAR in North Carolina, a new partnership with racing and New York as well, horse racing, that is. Jim Gazzale from Legal Sports Report. Jim, hey, happy Friday. I know there's a big weekend ahead for you in horse racing, getting closer, of course, to the Kentucky Derby as well in May. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Craig.
All right, so let's start with where we are with sports betting with a state that we've talked about quite a ton here on the show. It is the state of Minnesota. Now, while California has struggled to sort of put things through, and Texas and Georgia to some respect, there are a lot of people who predict that Minnesota will legalize sports betting over the next, year or two. What does this new tax bill mean? Does it mean we're any closer to that happening?
It's believe that there is still a fair bit of optimism in Minnesota, but we did see a new sort of competing piece of legislation get entered into the mix earlier this week in Minnesota on the Senate side. And it's largely similar to the two other bills that have been in motion for the last couple of months that my colleague Pat Evans speaks about here with you, Craig, quite often. A couple of differences, though. The main one being a 40% tax rate for operators on their net revenue, which, if that did hold and this ended up becoming law, would make it the second highest tax rate in the nation, behind New York's industry leading, if you will, 51%. And a lot of that tax revenue in this particular bill that was filed on Wednesday would be earmarked for problem gambling and addiction services, which is a bit different from how the revenue distribution is laid out in those two other bills. Like I said, a lot kind of mirrors the two other bills, and this third bill that we just saw filed earlier in the week. Exclusivity to the 11 tribes in Minnesota, and it also bans in-game wagering, which some within the industry believe could be a hurdle to ultimate passage for those two other bills that I talked about. Those two other bills have a 20% tax rate, unlike the 40% from this bill that was just filed. Another interesting thing from this latest Senate bill from earlier in the week, heavy focus, like I said, on the problem gambling initiatives, which a lot of that revenue would be directed towards some unique sort of betting limits that were included in this bill. Players would only be able to deposit $500 in a single 24-hour period. They'd only be able to lose $500 in a single 24-hour period. They'd only be able to lose $3,000 in any 30-day period before having a forced sort of cooling off period for 72 hours. And then they'd only be allowed to be logged into their Minnesota sports betting app for 4 consecutive hours before being essentially forced to exit the app. So that bill was filed on Wednesday, heavy on the problem gambling and addiction initiatives in terms of the revenue distribution and some of those betting limits. It is not on the committee calendar for discussion today in Minnesota, so we'll see where that one goes. But the two others that are companion bills, are moving along and sitting in committee now. Like I said at the top, a bit of optimism still, but we'll continue to track it at Legal Sports Report and provide any updates as they come.
All right, fair enough. Let's take a trip south from Minnesota to North Carolina, where sports betting wrapped up its first month of being legalized, and the success rate naturally huge because of the NCAA tournament. But, maybe, Jim, people do not follow as closely that NASCAR is also huge in that state. They have a big race coming up in May, and the betting market's certainly relying a little bit on the success of people being interested in betting on that sport as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and let's be honest. NASCAR is just a small piece of the overall sports betting, handle pie, if you will. But like you said, North Carolina is supposed to be a key state for NASCAR. And when I spoke to some NASCAR representatives a couple of months ago, they're talking about how their handle on NASCAR grew 50% from 2022 to 2023. And then in 2023 to 24, it was pretty stagnant. There was not a ton of growth in the overall NASCAR betting scene. So one of the things that they're hoping for is just the popularity of NASCAR in North Carolina. They have a headquarters there. They have 3 top 10 NASCAR TV markets in North Carolina, a couple of tracks, a couple of races coming up, like you said, Craig. So they're banking on North Carolina being a key state to sort of accelerate some of that growth. One of the things that they mentioned to me too was this new in-race betting product that they're hoping to roll out in the next, couple of months or by the end of the year. And unfortunately for them, it got derailed a little bit with the rain out at Daytona and moving that race, postponing that race to that Monday of that weekend. They told me that a lot of the operators were in town and they were supposed to get a demo of this in-race betting product to hopefully, partner with and implement into their platforms. But that race delay, that postponement prevented a full demo from taking place. So a slight delay there, which I found a little bit interesting because they told me too, Daytona, obviously one of the premier races of the NASCAR season in February. And then things kind of take a little bit of a dip in terms of, general interest and betting interest on NASCAR. And they told me that things tend to pick up in the summer. So I think from our original conversation, they were hoping that perhaps this in-race product might be available or at least close to being available in the summer. But it seems like with that race delay from Daytona with the rain, kind of put that off a little bit. So we'll see when that particular product becomes available. But that in-race betting product and opportunity certainly is a key for the folks at NASCAR moving forward.
All right. And as we close out, Jim, the week, a new partnership with DraftKings and something close to your heart, the New York Racing Association, Belmont Stakes coming up this summer. What does this new partnership mean?
Yeah, it's interesting that, we've seen a lot of racetracks and race operators in the last couple of years that sports betting has kind of taken off. They're partnering, these racetracks are partnering with sports books, and DraftKings and the New York Racing Association struck up a partnership last year. DraftKings and their horse racing app, DK Horse, sponsored the Jim Dandy Stakes, which is generally one of the first times we see a lot of the Kentucky Derby runners come back in the summer to kind of begin their summer and fall racing campaigns. So this year, DraftKings is taking that one step further. They're sponsoring another top quality race on Belmont Stakes weekend, which is up here in Saratoga this year, because Belmont is currently under construction. So they're sponsoring that marquee race over Belmont Stakes weekend, and then they're sponsoring the Travers Stakes, which is again a really key popular race where we see a lot of those Triple Crown horses run up here at Saratoga. So two really marquee events on the spring and summer racing schedule that DraftKings is being a part of. And I spoke to them a bunch last summer about that initial partnership with NYRA, and a lot of it revolved around that customer acquisition, which we see a lot of coming into the Triple Crown season, right? Where casual sort of sports fans, not necessarily horse players, but people who follow the marquee sporting events throughout the year, getting involved in betting on the horses for those Triple Crown races, especially and those big weekends. So DraftKings, when I spoke to them last year, they were telling me that these are just opportunities to kind of increase the brand, grow the brand, bring new customers in, whether it be to their DK Horse app, whether it be to the DraftKings sports betting app or their online casino apps. We do see a lot of customer acquisition, promos, heavy marketing around the Triple Crown races as these operators try to bring in additional customers when that sports fan might be paying a little bit more attention to horse racing. So DraftKings, Naira, another partnership for this year with, like I said, 2 marquee events, one coming up in June and the other towards the end of the summer in August to bolster that customer base.
All right. Well, Jim, enjoy the races this weekend. We'll check back with you next week as we get closer and closer to the Kentucky Derby next month. Thanks again for coming on.
All right. Thanks, Craig. Have a good weekend.
All right. Before we get to the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown, we've got to preview tonight's college basketball games. The women's Final Four is tonight. So Coach Young will be with us, and we'll take a look at the big game, of course, between UConn and Iowa, and also preview the games on the men's side as well. Maybe we'll ask Coach about Bronny James going to the NBA if he doesn't mind. We'll take a quick time out here on NewsWire. Craig Mish here with you until the top of the hour, and then the early line takes over at that point. We'll be back after these quick messages where it's smarter to be on SportsGrid. Don't go away.
So I'm not sure Alabama is the team to knock them off from this second consecutive national championship chase. But what will be the key for the Crimson Tide if they can even cover a number?
That wing ball screen action, how you defend that is going to be a problem because a Donovan Clingan, it forces you to change so much what you do defensively if he's able to score inside.
Only on SportsGrid.
Talk all you want about how fat he is. No one can guard him. No one can stop him. He's a violent offender. He does whatever he wants in the low block and at the 10. He just does whatever he wants and scores at will, ad nauseum.
They're the Mike Tyson of college basketball. At some point, they're going to throw a haymaker. And when it connects, Pharrell, you're not getting up.
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid. Your 24/7 sports wagering network. The early line.
Magical and historic season in Lincoln, Nebraska continues.
He is the best player in the NBA, but also in the biggest moments where the national media is watching.
NewsWire.
Something that we have never seen happen before with one of the iconic coaches in the game.
Pharrell Coast to Coast.
The team covers. It's automatic. It's every time. Not sometimes. It's every time.
Game time decisions.
Luka is actually far more dangerous from 3 on the road this year than at home.
This game here tonight, you may want to consider taking as many points as humanly possible.
In-game live. Prime time.
We got not one, but 2 coaches fired systems in place.
Sports Rage
This
Late
sort of
Night.
has letdown written all over it. It's going to be hard to match the emotion that they played with the other night.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. We've got huge games in college basketball this weekend. The last multi-play weekend of games in college basketball this season. It all begins tonight with the women's Final Four and the biggest game of the season between UConn and Iowa. Let's bring in Coach Young. He'll be all over SportsGrid this weekend talking about it, breaking it down. Coach, this is really what it all comes down to. I mean, the best basketball in college basketball this season happens this weekend. It starts tonight. I would imagine that if last week's games were the most watched ever, what would we have in store for this weekend's games?
You know, good to be on with you, Craig. And it was funny. I was talking to Donnie and Ben earlier on the early line, and I brought up a point. I think having this game be the second game, UConn Iowa being at 9, I would think folks be ready for more like a 9:30 to 9:45 tip. You're probably going to need about 30 minutes or 25 minutes from the court clears from the end of the South Carolina game versus NC State before they start the clock for the next game. So that game's not going to start on time. It's going to start closer to 9:30. But it sets up a scenario where the West Coast can watch that at prime time at 6:30 or so when the game tips off. So a great job by the NCAA with this. The women's game it's exploded, Craig. Let's be honest. You know this better than I do over the last 2 years with the star power. So what do you have tonight? You have the most dynamic, most polarizing player, and I would say arguably women's college basketball history, at least in the last 30 to 40 years, versus the most polarizing team and the most polarizing coach in UConn and Gino Auriemma. So it's a great storyline. It should be a great matchup. And I tell you this, I told people this earlier this week. If you got plans tonight, dinner reservations, change them. Get rid of them. Make sure you're in front of a TV tonight because it's going to be fireworks in a women's game.
Yeah, first time I can ever remember Gino being in this spot and not getting talked about at all. And that's where I'll begin here, as he's 3-point favorites, 2.5 right now on FanDuel for UConn, total of 162.5. Point blank question, Coach. And again, I know it's a loaded one here. Are we getting carried away here with Caitlin Clark and Iowa? I mean, is UConn the better team here? Are they going to win this game tonight? I see a lot of people taking the money's coming in on UConn. I see a lot of people taking the Huskies tonight.
Well, here's what I would say. Offensively, Iowa's absolutely fantastic. The number 1 points per possession offense in the country versus, ready, folks, one of the top 10 defensive teams in points per possession and UConn. The difference here is not so much the Iowa offense versus UConn defense. The advantage may be slanted the other way, which is the UConn offense versus a Iowa defense that is really in the bottom, I think, third in points per possession defensively, according to the metrics on Synergy, which is what we use or what I used and I still use with the college and the pro game in regards to analytics of breakdown by possession. So when you look at that, that's where the game is going to be won is, can Iowa muster enough stops defensively against a UConn team that's playing really well and a Paige Beckers that really has been taking like a back seat to Caitlin Clark? Remember, Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers were teammates on the USA Under-18 national team, along with Haley Van Lith. Try stopping those three guards playing together at the same time. But remember, folks, when she was a freshman, she was National Player of the Year and took her team to the Final Four. Paige Beckers has been hurt the last 2 years. She's playing her best basketball, I would say better basketball than her freshman year, and her ability to defend. We may see it tonight, Craig. We may see it times. Mule will start on her. We may see Paige Beckers guarding Caitlin Clark at times. You saw her do it versus Juju Watkins, particularly in the fourth quarter. I actually do like UConn to win this game because I think Iowa will struggle to defend. I think Gino will slow the game down and play it at his pace.
It should be a phenomenal matchup. And again, with a very rare scenario, Coach, where you got player props on the women's side here in the Final Four. I mean, you don't see this that often. In fact, I don't ever recall seeing it. I'm sure it's happened before. This is the first time where I've gone to these sites and can see the options on FanDuel with Caitlin Clark's points, assists, rebounds, three-pointers, 33.5 points, 9.5 assists, 6.5 rebounds, 5.5 3-points made. Is there any position to take here, Coach? Do you like any of these four?
Well, the one I would look at is really, to me, I think they're going to struggle to guard Paige Beckers. I don't know who is a defender in Iowa, but I don't see one that can slow Paige down. So if you think Connecticut's going to win, you could look at FanDuel. Paige scored 25 plus in Connecticut to win at plus 186. That would be something to look at. As crazy as this sounds, and I think Caitlin Clark is phenomenal. I think 33.5 may be too many points. Gino Auriemma is not going to play drop coverage against Caitlin Clark. He's not going to go under ball screens for Caitlin Clark. He's going to say this: if they're going to win, they're going to get the ball out of Caitlin Clark's hands. So to me, I look at maybe going under 33.5 points for Caitlin Clark. Maybe if anything, if you look anything over, maybe you look over in her assists, because I think Gino's going to make her give the ball up and make other people beat him, not Caitlin tonight.
All right, and as far as Beckers real quick is concerned, also props there, 26.5 points, 4.5 assists, 6.5 rebounds, 3.5 or 2.5 on the 3 points made. So you like the over on the points? Is that right?
I do like the over on the points. If you want to go a little bit less and you think, like I said, UConn's going to win, 25 plus and UConn to win is plus 186 on FanDuel right now. That's something I would consider. If you want to put it all together with Caitlin, with Paige, I really think something you can look at is maybe if they have a points, rebounds, and assists for Caitlin, for Paige Beckers. They do not have that. They have Caitlin Clark at 51.5. I cannot touch that. I think you're going to get a complete performance. And while Caitlin Clark is the most dominating offensive player I've ever seen in women's college basketball, and that goes back, I'm 47, I go back a long way. To me, the more complete overall player may be shown tonight, Paige Beckers. See if closer to game time they hang up points, rebounds, and assists for Paige Beckers. I would be interested in jumping in on that.
All right, so the first game of the two is the one that I'm going to have to lean on you here, Coach, because I don't know a ton about North Carolina State or South Carolina, having not watched this most of the season. All I know is the Gamecocks are huge favorites. No one's talking about them. They could easily win the national title here, undefeated all season long. Does NC State? I know they're in both sides here, the men and the women. And there's probably an interesting parlay to make here too. But regardless of that, do they stand a chance? And then I'll ask you about them against Purdue too. But do they stand a chance tonight to, let's just call it, keep it close here? An upset would be monumental, I know, at this stage.
I think this line is way too great. And if you look at lately some of the games that they've played, they didn't cover against Oregon State, South Carolina. They didn't cover against Indiana. Throw away the first 2 rounds of the game. They didn't cover against LSU. They didn't cover against Tennessee. They didn't cover against Texas A&M. They've not covered a bunch of games straight. They win them. They don't cover them. So to me, here's how you play this. I would look at NC State. Wes Moore is one of the best coaches in the country. No one talks about. I think he finds a way to keep it close. If the game is close at halftime, then jump on South Carolina at halftime. I just don't want to lay 11.5 points for a team that hasn't covered. And they've been quirky, Craig. If you look at the game against Indiana, they were up. They let it come back. Oregon State, they couldn't break away. That is a live game to bet at the break, but I do like NC State in the first half to cover the spread.
Okay, now let's go. If that's the appetizer, maybe. I don't know. Main course could be tonight, to be honest, but let's go to Saturday's games. It's the Final Four. We'll start off with, and honestly, both games are expected to be non-competitive, which I find hard to believe given the way that this tournament has gone down. North Carolina State, the surprise of the Final Four, taking on Purdue. Coach, I started fading Purdue around the Sweet 16. That did not work out. They're 9.5-point favorites, total of 146. I mean, maybe I'm nuts here, but I think Spartans have a shot tonight. Wolfpack. I think the Wolfpack have a shot tonight against Purdue. Am I crazy?
No, I don't think you're crazy. I think the line is really large, and I would look at taking the points plus 9.5. I am so enamored by this. Like, you talk about the main course. This is the main course for me. I'm a big man. I like big men play. Enough of this guard crap. I want big men. And then you got it. DJ Burns, Zach Edey, battle of a 7'4 monster with one of the most dominating moves, his jump hook, once he gets to the hole, versus DJ Burns at 6'9", 275. I want to see that scale. I think it's about 25 pounds too light, but this is a DJ Burns that can take you outside a little bit. Intriguing matchup. I like the points here, and I think you're going to get a pretty good game. Purdue moves on to the final. They're just going to have to sweat this one out. The one thing to watch, though, early on is the ability to make threes. NC State has not been a good three-point perimeter defensive team. They've been fantastic during this tournament, including 2 times against Duke ACC tournament and in the Elite Eight. They shot 5 for 20. You have one of the top shooting teams in the country in Purdue. Ken Smith, Ken Lawyer, Ken Jones, Ken Gillis knock down threes. If they're able to knock down threes, this game is over. But if they can't, NC State can hang around.
All right, so final game. It's Alabama and Connecticut. And Connecticut has dominated since the very beginning of the season. Most have them winning back-to-back championships with winning tonight. Coach, here's the analysis I've heard. I don't know if it's lazy or not. You tell me. Either this game with Alabama's chaos is going to go right down to the final bucket, or they're going to lose by 30. Is that fair? Is it somewhere in the middle? They're 11.5-point favorites tonight.
Craig, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think that's lazy analysis. I think it's smart. Listen, Alabama's not going to blow out UConn because UConn's going to be able to score. Alabama's got to outscore them. But here's the problem, Craig. We sat in the same situation in the Elite Eight, and we said this. Illinois was playing UConn, and UConn had not seen any offense like Illinois. Well, look what they did. They put poor Terrence Shannon Jr. in jail. That was so much they did this kid up. So now you have a team in Alabama who shoots about half their shots from 3 versus one of the best defensive teams in the country. They need to score because they're not going to be able to stop UConn. I would look at anything like at Donovan Clingan over 15.5 points. I would run that pick and roll action, and I would try to get Grant Nelson in foul trouble. If you're Alabama, Grant Nelson's got to stay out of foul trouble. And Sears and Estrada, who I call it Sears earlier today, Baby Brunson, because he reminds me so much of Jalen Brunson, that lefty, 6'1", crafty, can shoot the ball. He's got to be electric. But that defense of Tristan Newton, that defense of Castle, that defense of Diarra, I think is going to be too much. Listen, they cover every game against the spread in the tournament the last 2 years. Every game they've won by double digits. I don't think it changes today. I think they win by 15 or so. And if Alabama is careful and they don't shoot the ball well, Craig, they could lose by 30 tonight.
Coach, were you a Yankees fan or a Mets fan? I forget. Which one?
Oh, pain and torture. Come on. Hey,
Mets?
Craig, you want to do this with me, Craig? I like the Mets.
They're okay. 30 seconds to go, Coach. You're facing Doc Gooden. I'm Doc Gooden. Instead of throwing you a fastball, here's the curve. Bronny James, college basketball or the NBA next season? He made the announcement today. 30 seconds.
I think Bronny is going to test the waters, but I think he goes back to college one more year. He's in the transfer portal. I wonder where he ends up, but I would say one more year of Bronny in college.
Okay, fair enough. You hit the curveball. Good job. All right, Coach, enjoy the games this weekend. We'll catch up again for the championship Monday night.
I swung with my eyes closed.
All right, we'll be right back.
So I'm not sure Alabama is the team to knock them off from this second consecutive national championship chase. But what will be the key for the Crimson Tide if they can even cover a number?
That wing ball screen action, how you defend that is going to be a problem because Donovan Clingan forces you to change so much what you do defensively if he's able to score inside.
Only on SportsGrid.
Talk all you want about how fat he is. No one can guard him. No one can stop him. He's a violent offender. He does whatever he wants in the low block and at the 10. He just does whatever he wants and scores at will, ad nauseum.
They're the Mike Tyson of college basketball. At some point, they're going to throw a haymaker. And when it connects, Pharrell, you're not getting up.
Pharrell Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York team has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid, your 24/7 sports wagering network. The early line.
Magical and historic season in Lincoln, Nebraska continues.
He is the best player in the NBA, but also in the biggest moments where the national media is watching.
NewsWire.
Something that we have never seen happen before with one of the iconic coaches in the game.
Pharrell coast to coast.
The team covers. It's automatic. It's every time. Not sometimes. It's every time.
Game time decisions.
Luka is actually far more dangerous from three on the road this year than at home.
This game here tonight, you may want to consider taking as many points as humanly possible.
In-game live. Prime time.
We got not one, but two coaches fired systems in place.
Sports Rage
This
late
sort
night.
of has letdown written all over it. It's going to be hard to match the emotion that they played with the other night.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on the Sports Grid. I'm Craig Mish. As we end the show today, another one of these sad stories in Major League Baseball that gets me fired up every time I hear it. A fan caught Shohei Ohtani's first home run as a member of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Dodgers want the ball back. Ohtani wants the ball back. And then there's a fight that ensues with the fan and the team. And it happened again. This is a woman, I guess, who caught the ball. She told The Athletic that she was cornered by the Dodgers, sort of, pressured to give the ball up, for an exchange of like nothing. And in the end, she gave the ball back and she got a signed ball, signed bat, etc. Got feelings on this. I've shared them before on shows like this, and I'll share them again. Folks, if this ever happens to you and you catch a home run ball and the player wants it back, or something like that, folks, you do not have to give this ball back. You paid for your ticket. It is yours. Do not feel any pressure whatsoever to give these billionaires and millionaires a ball back for something that's just signed. It means nothing to them. These guys are making, if they want the ball back, they're making a fortune, and they can pay you something or they can figure it out. Now, look, if it's the first home run for a kid who may not eventually be anything in the future of Major League Baseball, you want to do the right thing, give them the ball back. Yes, that's probably it. But when it comes to somebody like Shohei Ohtani or Ken Griffey Jr. or Barry Bonds, and they just want to put you in a corner and give you nothing for it, it's absolutely ridiculous. The other thing that I read in this article from The Athletic is that the ball is worth nothing once they leave the stadium because they can't authenticate it. That's a bunch of bull. You take a picture of the ball in front of somebody else. What do you think at any of these auction houses are not going to take the ball and still offer you 50 or 100 grand for it? Stupidest thing I've ever heard. Just because they can't authenticate it on the spot, someone will end up paying for that ball. Maybe it doesn't go for 100% of what you wanted. It'll go for 70% or 80% or something like that. Do whatever you want. It's your ball. That'll do it for the show. Thanks again to Jim Gazzale, Coach Young, and of course, our guest contributor, Matt Lutovsky from Sporting News. Thanks to Freg and our producer, Michael Cohen. I'm Craig Mish. I'll see you tomorrow morning for Fantasy Sports Today. If not, Monday morning, next edition of NewsWire.